They're now facing projected losses somewhere between $200 million and $400 million. And to all those who can't stand it when I succeed, that winged statue of victory came down to meet her. Crowds lined up just to get a glimpse. And I can only hope that, in spite of my flaws, in spite of my missteps and broken pieces, and there are many, people still show up. Disney is currently in full-blown crisis mode, and the situation is far worse than anyone could have imagined. After the catastrophic release of Snow White, which ended in a monumental $120 million box office disaster, Disney executives are in absolute panic. Emergency meetings are taking place behind closed doors. Fingers are being pointed in every direction, and they're scrambling to figure out who should shoulder the blame. But what's even more shocking, according to explosive rumors, Disney may be considering demanding that Rachel Zegler return a portion of the lost funds. Yes, you read that correctly. Inside sources claim that Disney is actively weighing the option of holding its lead actress financially accountable. The reason? Damage to the brand, a public relations nightmare, and a tidal wave of backlash, which many believe is directly tied to her actions and persona. And this isn't just idle gossip floating through studio corridors. Multiple internal sources allege that after the film's chaotic opening weekend, Disney's top brass convened an emergency high-level meeting to assess the full scope of the fallout. One of the more controversial questions raised during that meeting: did Rachel Zegler's conduct, from her viral interviews mocking the original Snow White to her tone-deaf political commentary and her tone-deaf press tour, potentially violate any clauses in her contract? It's an unprecedented scandal shaking the Hollywood system. What really baffles me is this: Disney and these major studios pour hundreds of millions into these productions. Do they ever stop to think about doing basic vetting? Maybe a vulnerability assessment? A little opposition research before handing a global brand to someone with a history of volatile public statements. Some insiders suggest that lawyers are already involved. Disney's legal department is reportedly reviewing whether they can invoke any morality clauses or undisclosed provisions in Zegler's contract, particularly those tied to public image and media conduct. What looks like a basic damage control effort from the outside is actually turning into an all-out corporate war, and all signs point to Rachel Zegler being the first potential casualty. And perhaps the wildest part of all, the alleged tone of that internal meeting. One insider claims that the executives weren't just disappointed, they were furious. One high-ranking exec reportedly exploded, shouting, "She destroyed a billion-dollar brand in less than a year, and we paid her to do it." Another source added that when someone floated the idea of demanding financial compensation, every executive in the room nodded without hesitation, whether that means clawing back bonuses, canceling profit-sharing agreements, or forcing a public apology remains unclear. Back in 1937, the original film clearly emphasized her love story with, as Zegler herself mockingly put it, a guy who literally stalks her. So this time, they eliminated the prince, or rather, redefined him. It's really not a love story at all, Zegler told press, which is honestly wonderful. And while Andrew Burnham, a fantastic actor, was cast, his role in the plot is deliberately vague. It's not about romance anymore, which is a bold choice for a classic fairy tale. What has become painfully clear is this: for Disney, Rachel Zegler is no longer viewed as a valuable asset. And while the public sees her posting apologies and attempting to calm the storm, insiders claim that much of the so-called apology wasn't even her idea. Reportedly, Disney's own PR team crafted large parts of the statement, essentially requiring her to show public remorse in an effort to contain fan outrage and minimize reputational damage. If these reports are accurate, then Rachel isn't just being blamed. She's being made to pay for the collapse, both symbolically and literally. And if Disney manages to claw back funds or rewrite the terms of her contract, it could set off a shockwave in Hollywood. Zegler herself is said to be utterly blindsided. Sources close to her describe her as near tears upon learning about the financial disaster unfolding around the film's release. Internally, she believed this role would be her launch pad, her grand entrance into the Disney legacy. Instead, she has become the face of an unparalleled corporate scandal. Her initial excitement to portray such an iconic character has now been crushed by brutal box office failure and a relentless flood of public criticism. What was once marketed as the beginning of her reign in Hollywood has turned into a public nightmare. So no, It doesn't look like Rachel's heading for Oscar gold, as some have predicted. What was once hyped as Disney's next big hit is now being spoken of as one of its most embarrassing flops in recent memory. This project was supposed to be the crown jewel in Disney's effort to modernize its animated classics with a progressive lens. Instead, it became a very costly lesson about the dangers of pushing messaging at the expense of storytelling. Critics haven't held back. The film bombed at the box office and is now being labeled a brand-destroying disaster that managed to alienate both nostalgic fans and newer audiences alike. That it had every ingredient for success: built-in nostalgia, a massive budget, and a fresh young lead. But it ended up being a media bomb. Many believe the failure wasn't just due to poor marketing or unfortunate timing. They point to fundamental missteps in casting, tonal direction, and public image management. A volatile combination. Social media is flooded with theories, deep dives, and speculation. Fans and casual viewers alike are digging into everything, from behind-the-scenes chaos to strategic blunders, trying to understand how a powerhouse like Disney could have stumbled so badly. At this point, Snow White is being studied as a textbook example of what happens when a film loses all connection with its intended audience. From Zegler's dismissive comments about the original story, to her divisive political stances, to the drastic thematic overhauls, the disconnect wasn't accidental. It was baked into the DNA of the project from day one, and now Disney is being forced to reevaluate not just this movie, but the entire direction of their live-action remakes. And let's be clear, this firestorm isn't going away anytime soon. There was a time when the mere announcement of a Snow White remake would send fans into a frenzy of excitement. Disney invested hundreds of millions believing they had a surefire hit. Instead, they ended up with a historic misfire that's left even seasoned analysts in disbelief. From day one, the red flags were everywhere. Reports say the budget spiraled out of control, with some estimates landing between $170 million and $270 million thanks to delays, reshoots, and an avalanche of production setbacks. There were strikes, a COVID outbreak on set, and even a fire that halted filming. Every step forward came with another step back. They had her tweet something like, "Can't wait to be your Snow White. So excited." And it blew up with millions of views. The studio applauded her. But then, just moments later, she followed it up with, "And never forget, Free Palestine." And her co-star is Jewish. It was chaotic. Executives reportedly flew one of the producers out personally to meet with Zegler and plead with her, "Please, take the post down. You could have your beliefs, just not on the Disney platform." By that point, some Disney execs were already questioning the entire trajectory of the project. Some even whispered whether doing such a radical remake of a beloved classic was ever a good idea in the first place. But it was too late. The money was spent, the sets were built, and Rachel Zegler had already been introduced to the world as the new face of the franchise. From the moment she was cast, there was noise. As a relatively new actress, Rachel carried immense pressure in portraying Disney's first ever princess. At first, she seemed thrilled, but soon after, her public statements started raising alarms. Rachel Zegler's comments about the original Snow White sent shockwaves through the fanbase. She openly mocked the film's central love story, even going so far as to call the prince a stalker. Fans were stunned. Snow White isn't just another animated film. It's a cornerstone of cinema history, the very foundation of the Disney legacy. But instead of showing reverence for that legacy, Rachel's words were widely perceived as dismissive, even insulting. Hardcore Disney loyalists didn't hold back. Many felt she had directly disrespected Walt Disney's vision and dishonored generations of families who grew up cherishing the original. And rather than easing the tension, Rachel only made things worse. She doubled down in interviews, repeating that the film needed to be modernized. She advocated for removing the classic romantic storyline in favor of portraying a more independent Snow White, a heroine no longer waiting to be rescued. According to her, the old damsel in distress narrative no longer resonated with modern audiences, and this remake was meant to fix what she viewed as outdated ideas. However, her tone, increasingly blunt, sarcastic, and at times even dismissive, began to alienate not just critics, but also many fans who initially supported her. What could have been a thoughtful, Nuanced conversation about updating classic stories quickly morphed into something entirely different. Instead of sounding like a champion of progress, Rachel came across as someone who was mocking the very fairy tale she was hired to represent, and by extension, the people who still loved it. What began as simple critiques of the source material started to feel more like personal jabs, not just at the story, but at the devoted audience that had kept it alive for nearly a century. While some applauded her desire to bring empowerment and strength to the role, many others saw her attitude as arrogant, condescending, and outright combative. The idea of portraying a stronger, more independent protagonist could have been celebrated if only it hadn't been framed as a rejection of tradition instead of a respectful evolution. The more Rachel tried to explain her stance, the further she drifted from the very audience she was supposed to connect with. Rather than building bridges between old and new, her interviews only widened the gap, transforming a generational debate into an all-out ideological clash. And at the center of it all stood Rachel, caught in the eye of a cultural storm, one that, by many accounts, she had helped ignite. The backlash came fast and fierce. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like hashtag not my Snow White and hashtag boycott Snow White. Memes flooded the internet, pasting Rachel's face in the classic scenes alongside mocking captions, turning her into the punchline of a controversy that was quickly spinning out of control. But the fallout didn't stop there. Users began digging into Rachel's old political posts, resurfacing past tweets where she harshly criticized Donald Trump and his supporters, saying they would never know peace. For a company like Disney, which relies on broad, bipartisan appeal, this was a public relations nightmare. Overnight, Snow White went from being a timeless fairy tale to a lightning rod in the culture war. The conversation shifted. No longer was it about fairy tale magic or childhood wonder. It became about politics, values, identity, and who has the authority to define what Disney stands for in today's divided world. What was intended to bridge generations ended up dividing them even further. And inside the halls of Disney, panic set in. Studio executives reportedly began holding emergency strategy meetings while the PR team scrambled to contain the chaos. The original priority, a successful movie launch, was replaced with one desperate objective: stop the bleeding. Rachel eventually released a public apology, attempting to walk back her earlier statements and cool down the controversy. But the effort backfired. Critics pounced, calling the apology calculated, scripted, and transparently timed to align with the film's release. No one was buying it. And then things took a darker turn. Detractors pointed fingers at others too, including one Hollywood actor who had once gained massive fame and fortune for portraying a dwarf on one of the most iconic TV shows of the past 2 decades. He had since spoken out against casting little people in the new Snow White, claiming it was demeaning. But critics fired back with a mix of disbelief and irony. After all, they said, this was a man who built his entire career and bank account on roles just like the ones he was now condemning. He got rich playing a dwarf, one commentator noted, and now he's offended that other actors with dwarfism are being offered work? That's hypocrisy. The contradictions, the public clashes, and the high-stakes nature of it all have turned Snow White into something far beyond just another Disney remake. It's become a flashpoint, a mirror reflecting Hollywood's identity crisis, the fractured lines in fandom culture, and the dangers of trying to rewrite history without bringing the audience along. He made his fortune, then turned around and kicked the ladder down behind him. For many, this wasn't a heartfelt reflection. It felt like pure crisis theater, straight out of a corporate PR playbook. Social media exploded with frame-by-frame breakdowns of Rachel's apology. Users analyzed every sentence, highlighting what was missing, what sounded disingenuous, and what continued to rub people the wrong way. Far from putting out the fire, her statement only poured gasoline on it. To much of the public, the message didn't signal humility. It confirmed what they already suspected. This wasn't remorse. It was damage control, dressed up to look like accountability. And while Rachel was facing the backlash, Disney, behind the scenes, had already begun quietly scaling back the promotional campaign. According to internal sources, red carpet events were dialed down. Public appearances became tightly controlled. And it was all done with one goal in mind: stop Rachel from saying something that might ignite another controversy. By the time premiere night rolled around, The atmosphere was anything but electric. It didn't feel like a glamorous launch of a multi-million-dollar Disney spectacle. It felt more like a discreet, private screening. And then came opening weekend, where Disney had at least hoped for a moderate box office performance, something, anything, to justify the colossal investment and to restore faith in its live-action remake strategy. But instead of a rebound, the studio was hit with a brutal blow. In the United States, Snow White barely crossed the $43 million mark during its debut weekend, a shockingly low figure when weighed against its massive marketing campaign and the enduring global recognition of the Snow White name for a studio. Accustomed to dominating the box office, this was a punch to the gut. Globally, the film brought in roughly $87 million in its early days. On paper, it may sound decent, but it didn't even come close to covering costs. Industry insiders estimate that Disney poured over $250 million into the project between production and promotion. The film didn't just underperform, it failed to even meet the minimum threshold. Distribution, marketing, and production costs were nowhere near recouped. Industry analysts were stunned. Those who had remained cautiously optimistic began slashing their forecasts in real time. That very night, insiders were already warning that the film might not even break even. Not streaming rights, not merchandise, not international releases. Nothing seemed capable of salvaging what was quickly turning into a historic financial catastrophe. And as if that wasn't enough, the movie offered no silver linings, no viral scenes, no unexpected emotional resonance, not even a single meme-worthy moment that could redeem it. For many, it was a total failure, the kind that shakes an entire studio to its core. For Rachel Zegler, the disappointing debut added another crushing layer to a narrative that was already collapsing around her. Once the box office numbers were in, the blame game began. Was it the script, the direction, the marketing strategy? But ultimately, all fingers pointed to the project's most public face. Rachel herself. In Hollywood, whispers turned into headlines. Rumors swirled that Disney no longer had any interest in collaborating with Rachel on future projects. Some even claimed that certain previously discussed deals had been quietly canceled. Behind closed doors, executives were said to be exploring legal options to recover a portion of their losses. Though no formal action has been confirmed. What is clear, however, is this: Rachel's relationship with the House of Mouse is now hanging by a thread. And across the broader industry, her reputation has taken a serious hit. Several producers reportedly see her as a radioactive figure, someone whose presence on a cast list could doom a film before it ever gets made. In Hollywood, perception is everything. And when an actress becomes more associated with controversy than with performance, projects stop getting greenlit. Meanwhile, fans continue dissecting what exactly went wrong. Some blame Disney for trying to fix a story that didn't need fixing. Others pointed to the casting choice from the very beginning. But nearly everyone agreed on one point: Rachel's comments caused real, measurable damage. Audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes plummeted. Viewer reactions were overwhelmingly negative. And while memes and criticism spread like wildfire across social platforms, Disney maintained radio silence. Even Rachel's own co-stars refrained from making public statements. Martin Kleba, who played Grumpy, said it best in an interview: the controversy robbed the cast of what should have been a celebratory moment. Now, Rachel Zegler finds herself at a career crossroads. She can choose to retreat from the spotlight and attempt to rebuild her image from the ground up, or she can stick to her guns and continue down the same path, which many believe will only make things worse. But one thing is for certain: she is no longer the bright new star Disney once hoped to launch. Instead, she's become a cautionary tale. Snow White is no longer just a box office disappointment. It has become a warning sign for the entire entertainment industry. Because when you underestimate your audience, when you belittle a beloved legacy, and when you misuse the platform you've been given, not even a record-breaking budget or a legendary brand can protect you. Especially not when your name becomes forever linked to one of the most notorious flops in recent Hollywood history. Can Rachel Zegler bounce back from this? Or are we witnessing the true ending of her fairy tale with Disney? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date with the biggest Hollywood controversies, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.